This is one of my three-dimensional collages. You can see the depth as I move it around. Every one is made out of paper. And you can see the depth on this one. And I have an entire wall. Most of it are my collages and some are my oil paintings. When I begin working on a collage, I use a large sheet of watercolor paper and I look for at least one image in my collection that's interesting. And this time what I'm working with is I came across this unusual fish, which is an octopus, and he sort of caught my attention. But what was I going to do with him? Well, I need other pieces to go along with it, so I start looking for background pieces. Here's one that I tried. But I decided it was actually too much, too busy, so we kind of junked that background. I tried this one. Began to look a little better and maybe a little more interesting. But then I thought that the octopus kind of got lost in that background. So I went for something a little more simple, and I came across this background. And this said to me, that I think will work. Along with the octopus, I had to find some other pieces that would work with it. So I started looking. I had all sorts of pieces that I keep in my collection, and I started to bring them out and see what might work with this octopus. Well, the whole process is really a process of trying out different pieces and see what fits together. After selecting the pieces that I think I want to be raised, I paste them down onto something called gator board, which is a very heavy, stiff kind of board that doesn't bend very easily. So you can see that I have the octopus pasted down and now some interesting pieces that I think I'm going to include in the composition. What I do next is I have to cut out around each of these pieces, and I will do that shortly, but I can't show you exactly how I do it because I use an X-Acto knife and it's very, very difficult to get the cuts exactly right. You can get me if you want.
I can get that thing with your hand.
Well, then just get the thing with my hand.
Oh, I get, okay.
Okay. I'm starting to cut through the gator board to get the image of the fish, the octopus, but you can see it is a tedious and difficult job to go around all of these shapes because the gator board is not something that's easy to work with. I've already cut out these, and you can see how I'm going to start building them up one by one. But before that, they have to be sanded off, and I paint the outsides so that you don't have any white edges.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, that's it for now.
Shut it?
Yeah.
I don't know how to shut it. You better shut it. See, it didn't shut.
The edges of my three-dimensional pieces are trimmed with this little scissors. They've been sanded, they've been trimmed, and then I paint them with acrylic paint with colors that match whatever the individual piece is. I sand it with this kind of sandpaper, and as you can see, they are standing up and they're ready to go to become part of the flat composition, but they can stand up because they are strong enough on that gator board. The next step in the process requires applying something called clear self-leveling gel. I put each of the images that I want to apply the gel on some wax paper because it's easier for me to peel it off. So each of these has already gotten the first coat, and I use a sponge brush, and there's the clear self-leveling gel. This requires many layers. It goes on and it looks kind of cloudy, but in the next image, as it dries, I will show you that it begins to dry clear. And this is what gives each of these items a glassy finish and makes the composition much more interesting. But it requires many layers before you get that look that I'm looking for. I've now put on a second layer of the self-leveling gel, and you can see where it has come over the piece, and eventually, after I pull it off the the bottom, I'm going to have to cut away all of this excess gel. The first layer dried overnight and became shiny, and now I had to put a second layer on. And I will keep putting layers on until I get the shine and the depth that I'm looking for in each of these pieces. But as I was playing with them, I decided I might need some other pieces that are not quite as deep and quite as thick. So I took this orange piece and I pasted it onto some watercolor paper so that it has some strength to it, and I will be able to use it in places where I don't need as much thickness or the amount of shine that I have on my other pieces. I should mention that cleanup is extremely important, because if you don't wash your utensils immediately, they get stiff and then they become totally useless. As you can see here, I built up the backs of each of these pieces so that when I turn them around, I'm going to be able to stack them at different heights. As you can see here, I built up the backs of each of these pieces so that when I turn them around, I'm going to be able to stack them at different heights. Just a glimpse into my studio, which is actually my dining room, which I very rarely use as a dining room. But as you can see, primarily I started off as an oil painter, and these are some of my paintings. This one won an award at the Metropolitan Museum. These are scenes that I've been doing of Bergen County. And I have one scene that I'm working on now while I'm doing my collages. The collages I do in between my oil paintings.